We like to tell ourselves that when a person dies, their soul departs immediately for a peaceful afterlife. It's a comforting thought, especially when you're alone in the dark. But historical folklore suggests a much grimmer reality. The boundary between the living and the dead is a porous, torn membrane rather than a solid wall. Early modern Europeans inhabited a super-enchanted world. They understood their physical environment to be a shared space, occupied by both the living and a host of hostile, wandering spirits. To the early Germanic speakers who coined the word, ghosts were literal instruments of blind terror and rage, entities clawing their way out of a demonic void to reach our realm. This threat moves closer in 3 distinct stages, starting out on isolated, cursed ground, moving across the roads and fields in the dead of winter, and finally, breaching the most private space of all, the human body itself. The first place the veil tears is out on the landscape, specifically at sites of violent tragedy or self-murder. According to traditional belief, sudden, traumatic death traps the soul. These Wiedergänger, or revenants, remain tethered by their own regret and fear, forced to haunt the exact location of their earthly remains. This historical engraving illustrates an execution scene with gallows, providing a glimpse into how the era handled the condemned. People believed the physical remains of those who died violently were spiritually infected, capable of passing a supernatural contagion to anyone who touched them. This fear was so pervasive that local governments hired specialized guards. In 1681, a Bavarian laborer named Hans Staudinger was paid to sit beneath a hanging corpse for 5 days and nights, tasked with ensuring no person or animal came into contact with the body. Staudinger was overwhelmed by the task. The dread of spiritual contamination in the pitch black was so intense that he refused to stand watch alone after sunset, forcing the county to hire a second laborer just to keep him company. In this worldview, a grave or an execution site operates as a permanent anchor point for supernatural malice, creating a physical scar on the local geography. The danger expands during the deep winter months, when spirits become untethered from their physical anchors and begin to roam the open countryside. Historical records identify specific death periods between the winter solstice and Epiphany. During these weeks, the barrier between realms stretches to its absolute thinnest, causing a massive spike in reported demonic activity. Folklorists documented a widespread belief in demonic soul troops, organized, malicious phantom armies surging across the frozen landscape in massive groups. These entities were said to engage in chaotic nocturnal battles. Anyone caught outdoors at night during these weeks risked being swept up and destroyed by the crossfire of the roaming dead. During these winter weeks, the physical world effectively belongs to the wandering dead. The open darkness becomes an active hunting ground. The ultimate dread comes when the threat bypasses the fields and the locked doors of the home, breaching the most intimate space imaginable, the interior of the human body. Demonic possession was understood as a spatial invasion. A malicious spirit bypasses the landscape entirely, forcing its way into human flesh to use the victim as a living bridge. This painting of Saint Philip Neri performing an exorcism documents the physical symptoms reported historically. The possessed suffered a brutal toll, characterized by wild limbs and unnatural postures. Records describe victims exhibiting bulging eyes, ripping out hair, and appearing like wild beasts. This historical photograph of a woman in a trance during a medical demonstration shows how these physical manifestations were later analyzed. Early psychiatrists noted that the terrifying bodily gestures recorded centuries ago mirrored the clinical symptoms of hysteria seen in their own wards. Theologians explained this through the concept of the third realm. The host's own soul is repressed, temporarily dead to the world, while their body is hijacked by a dark force that turns them into a walking gateway to the demonic void. It is the ultimate violation of natural law. Possession repurposes the human body, turning living flesh into a physical anchor for the afterlife. When you pull back and examine these beliefs across early modern Europe, you see the scale of the horror. Civilization was viewed as a tiny island surrounded by an ocean of malevolent entities. Historians describe this as a dreadful imminence. The dead do not depart. They exert a constant, suffocating pressure on our daily reality. Because these incursions are tethered to human trauma and violence, the dead will always find a fresh tear in the fabric. They always have a way back in. Under this weight of historical testimony, the perceived distance between the living and the damned begins to narrow. As long as there is trauma to anchor them, the dead remain a persistent physical threat to the living world. So the next time you feel a sudden, inexplicable wave of dread in the dark, remember that history doesn't consider it an overactive imagination. It considers it the sound of the veil tearing again.